Thank you for joining us. Let's stand for the pledge, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
President Daly?
Here.
Vice President Headland?
Here.
Trustee Clements?
Here.
Trustee McNall?
Here.
Trustee Parr?
Here.
Thank you. I'd like us to start our meeting with a moment of silence for Mr. Steve Gregorio, who was a Haldane graduate, a parent of some Haldane students, and an important member of our community. And he passed away on November 22nd, 2020. Thank you very much. The next Board of Education meeting will be on Tuesday, December 15th at 7 p.m. right here in the small gym. And our workshop topic will be a curriculum update for anyone who would like to join us. And I will turn it over to Dr. Benante for his update.
Thank you, Ms. Daly. I hope everyone enjoyed a restful Thanksgiving with your families. It's been nice to have our staff and our students back on campus this week. Continuing with our usual routine, only a few updates this week for the board. You may have heard or caught some headlines related to Governor Cuomo's comments the other day in updating the testing requirements, or what would be the testing requirements should a school end up in a orange or red zone, which again, still we are not. But I guess I would say the quick of it is the governor's office and through the Department of Health has lowered or decrease the amount of testing that would be required of schools in order to remain open. And we're still working closely with the Putnam County Department of Health to establish a supply line for testing in the event that we were in a situation where we had to facilitate a testing program in order to remain open. So perhaps more to come on that as the weeks go on here. As I shared last meeting, while we are seeing the rate of infection at a county level, it is clear now that the state is utilizing a more localized measure. However, we can't see what that measure or those measures are in this process, so we're not really sure where does the Philipstown community stand in relation to an infection rate. You kind of have to put some things together in order to get perhaps an estimate of what it is. Anecdotally, I will say that we're seeing an increase in the number of staff and students who are in a precautionary quarantine because they may be a contact of somebody who is a confirmed case, so we're monitoring that closely. And I think the next, in speaking with the Department of Health, the next week to 10 days will be critical in really determining whether or not we will have the capacity to remain open, and that hopefully folks did not gather over Thanksgiving, but there's an assumption that many have, and were that to have a negative influence on the rate of spread, then we should see that now in the coming days, because we'll be 6 days tomorrow, post-Thanksgiving, 7 days. Usually in that 7 to 10 day window is where you start to see other people getting sick. So we'll see how that goes over the next few days and continue to monitor that. I think what I'm sitting with is, and again, we've been fortunate and more fortunate than most that the cases that we have had within our community have happened with staff members who were already in an extended quarantine scenario, students who are already in an all remote learning scenario, so we have not had to close, and that's very unusual, but we have had cases within our community, and it's important to note that. In looking at how other districts are being impacted, there does seem to come a point where districts are determining that this constant, the potential to be constantly vacillating between being in and being out, and that kind of unknown element to each week is disruptive to families. And they're hearing from families that, and from staff, obviously, it would be easier, and actually the quality of instruction would actually be higher were we to go all remote for a period of time. So I'm monitoring the need to do that. Obviously, we haven't yet been in a position where we've had to close, but were we to find ourselves in this kind of back and forth, I think we have to ask ourselves that question. I certainly would be keeping the board apprised of any developments. We would have experienced a closure or two or maybe even three before we get there, but that could happen quickly. I've seen that happen in other districts, in particular over these last 2 weeks. So trying to pay attention to them and how they're handling it, what they're hearing from their community as indicators of where we may be a couple of weeks from now. We'll continue to hope for the best, and on campus we're still doing the right things, and I hope off campus we're all still doing the right thing as well to keep us in school, and we'll see how that goes. So those are the only updates I have for today as it relates to COVID, and I'll pause there to see if there's any questions from the board.
Christmas break is when to when?
So we go, I think, to that, the week of the 21st or around there. I think the Wednesday is our first day of break. Maybe even the Thursday, depending on where Christmas falls.
So Christmas is the Friday.
Mm-hmm.
So
I think we go up till the 22nd. And 23rd will be our first day off. So that would fall on the Wednesday.
So we've got to get through
2.5 weeks.
2.5 weeks. That was where I was going.
Yep. So, and my hope is, Margaret, we can get through this next 2.5 weeks. Right. But I said that 2.5 weeks ago, and I probably said that 2.5 weeks prior to that. So we're one day at a time. Right.
But 2.5 weeks feels doable.
It does feel doable. So, any other? The last comment I'll make, in trying to, I think we're back in the mode of, or I am, of listening to what the governor says each day, which I haven't been there in a while. I've enjoyed my break from that because that's where I'm learning things. So just a note for our board and our community, we have little to no advance notice on comments that are made, changes that are made to the process. This week it was testing, decisions which influence our school. I will put an update out this week to our community just so they're aware of what they can anticipate and anybody who's following what it would take to reopen our schools. So there will be an update from me. But I have noticed just a few other kind of points. The governor now clearly is expressing the importance of remaining open K through 8. I feel like we were there 3 months ago as a school community. 3 months ago, he wasn't quite, saying that. But again, I feel, the folks who are closest to the operation of the school were operating from that perspective, had an equity mindset, especially for our youngest learners or those with unique needs. I am concerned about the changes in metrics as it relates to testing, and certainly will continue to work closely with our district physician and our local Department of Health on making determinations as it relates to what amount of testing is the right amount of testing for us to safely remain open. So 3-4 months ago, there was the notion that if schools fell, in a positivity rate between 5 and 9%, we would move into a mode of monitoring. Then the microcluster approach came out, which had some clear delineations, which I believe were beyond, and we have not been designated as a particular zone. The testing requirements were pretty rigorous at that time, and now, again, I think the governor's doing so because he wants to set up a testing program that the schools can actually achieve. But we want to have a testing program set up that actually will result in the highest level of safety for our students, not just a target that we can achieve. So I'm still sitting with that. I'm still reading a lot about that. I know our local Department of Health and our district physician is as well. So while there may be standards that are established by the New York State Department of Health or out of the governor's office, we want to make sure that whatever standard we establish is what's right for our community and our kids. So I'll be spending a lot of time on that in the coming weeks.
Just a quick question on that. If I think that's great. And just having watched those testing criteria and metrics
Change.
shift a lot.
Yeah.
Is your impression that should we decide to establish a testing protocol and regimen that is at a level higher than what the state would require because we view it best for the community and the student, et cetera, that the state, because as my understanding, the state will supply all the collateral,
Right.
maybe not the organizational manpower, but the stuff. Would that hold? Do you have any sense?
I don't know yet.
Okay. Yep.
So that was the beginning of my conversation with the Department of Health yesterday, was around this changing metric and whether or not that's in the best interest for our community. And quite frankly, I don't think our local Department of Health knows yet how much supply they'll be provided, and then in turn, how much they can provide to us. So if they can get what they want and it's at our request, I don't think we'll have any issue, right? But I don't think they're clear yet on what they'll be provided with, and thus we're not yet clear on what we'll have.
And do you think that they have a good point of view on setting the governor's targets aside? What's the right amount?
I don't think they're there yet.
Okay.
I think they're consulting with others no different than we are to establish that. And the point that the governor will say, and you'll hear, is that we've demonstrated that schools are not, that this isn't spreading in schools, where you'll hear schools throughout New York that are testing and they're coming up with positivity rates of less than 1%, sometimes less than 0.1%. And that's significant, but I'm also keeping in mind, I don't yet know if it's fully scientific in that how we're sampling these districts within these communities. And I'll just point to something anecdotally here. We do a lot to keep our kids outside during the day and have up to this point. So I would say, sure, at Haldane, up to this point, there's been very little to no spread within our school. But what school looks like or looked like in September, October, November is very different than, or I should say mid-November, is very different than what it looked like mid-November to early December. And I don't mean to, give any impression that I think it's less safe. I just don't know if you can look at what's happened in the fall across schools in New York State and liken that to what's going to happen in the winter. I don't think we know. So I'm not there yet. I think we need more information, and the information that we have as of today is positive, but that I don't think it's the complete picture about how this virus spreads in our communities.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Did there seem to be any indication? I know in the city they're talking about phasing out hybrid learning. And is that a statewide? Was that something that Mayor de Blasio took upon himself, or did he indicate that it was from the?
Clearly, my impression of that is there's the beginnings of a relationship on that particular political matter,
Right.
which was contentious and has been throughout, at times throughout the summer and the fall. I'm still, the guidance we receive still suggests that we have to offer an all-remote option for families. So part of our hybrid model is driven by that. We have a certain percentage of families who feel that's what's best and what's right for their decision. And I'm not in a position where so there's two things. There's been no guidance provided to us, so outside of New York City, to suggest otherwise. And I think given what we know right now and what we don't know right now, I wouldn't anticipate any shifts right now or in the coming months even for us to shift away from that.
Great, thank you.
Last note, just on a vaccine, as we now hear about vaccines becoming available potentially in the next few weeks, there was a change, and I wasn't aware of this until yesterday. Shanna at the Department of Health had informed me that at one point, teachers and school employees were listed in the final tier of those to be vaccinated, and I think there's 4 tiers of or groups who will, in terms of an eligibility order, but had been moved up to the 2nd tier. So that, I think, is a good thing. Again, and timing-wise, we're not at a point to know, well, when will second-tier individuals be eligible? We're not aware at all of what the requirements will be. You know, can it be mandated, not mandated? There's a lot being discussed about that right now. But I do think it's promising that there's the potential for us to have access as school employees to a vaccine sooner. I do see our teachers and our staff here as essential employees, regardless of what their designation is at the state level. It's an important community service, and I think that will help alleviate some of the anxiety that folks may feel about coming into, an area where a lot of people come into each day. So, and I'll say I'll be the first person on that line for that vaccine. So if we want to host it here, I'm happy to do so. But not there yet. So
I find it really encouraging, both that the teachers and students are potentially being moved up the line,
Yep.
the fact that the governor is starting to say out loud that schools should remain in session,
Yep.
that is a priority. I find all of that very encouraging, that there's a shift happening in how they're looking at schools and students within this crisis. So I find that hopeful.
last note, it's COVID related, I guess, but more just good news. Many of our board members, if not all of you, receive your edition of On Board magazine, and you'll note on the back page, which is a great place to be, because some people just read the front and they look at the back. Many of our Haldane staff, in particular those who are part of the music department, were featured in an article on Board. Mr. McGrarty, Ms. Stein, Mr. Davidson had shared their thoughts about what it's like to teach music in this era that we are in. So our teachers were featured prominently in this article. And I just wanted to point out Dan McGrarty's comment here. And Dan had said this to me a couple of weeks ago. And I also heard a very similar thing. You know, Dan is the coordinator for the department. So, there's many leaders in our school district, and Dan's one of them, that we are all looking for the silver lining in this environment that we're currently in. And these folks have had to adapt pretty significantly. Their instruction, there's a picture of Dan outside here. The sub, I think says it's Travis, but we know it's Dan with his guitar on the lawn. But they've had to adapt their environments to be largely outdoors through the fall, and have done a fantastic job. And I've was observing one of Angela's classes a couple of weeks ago, and she was largely modeling the very same spirit and attitude with the kids, and I thought that was excellent. And Sean's comment to close the article also, I'd say, I see but a small portion of it, but I see so much I can't express my gratitude enough. And I think that's how all of our community feels about all of our educators right now. But a great article. If you haven't checked it out yet, please do. And we're actually going to feature the article in our monthly newsletter, which goes out later this week. We have a little caption from it, so hopefully to make it accessible for the entire school community. Okay, and Jen, if it's okay with you, I'll proceed right into the budget update.
Budget time.
It's getting there.
Here we
It's
are.
getting there. I'm going to use the podium.
Below my nose, really quick.
Oh boy, Ann. Oh, you're testing the limits of my eyes, Miss Dinio. It's good. Oh, I just have to press it. I just hit the button. So simple. I thought you were playing a joke on me. Cecilia, how is that? Is the volume okay? I won't lean down. So in past years, we have began the budget development process with a rollover budget. And I've been candid with the board at times that there are some benefits of facilitating and using that as a starting point in the budget development process. There's also some shortcomings to that. This year could be no better, I think, an example of why it's difficult to use a rollover budget as a starting point, because we've taken a significant amount of money that carried over from last school year and included it in this year's budget, but with the mindset that it won't carry into next school year. So looking and following the same rollover budget process that we have in the past may just lead to greater confusion this school year. So we're just going to enter into a preliminary overview tonight, a high-level view of how we're entering into the budget process, some key figures, in addition to some, I think, important foundational statements around how we're going to go into the thick of budget development next month. Really is when we get started. So again, just some background information this evening, some preliminary data, the main thing, and in case there's any confusion, proposed budget parameters and some partner meetings that we anticipate through the year. So I just want to take us back to the budget development process last year, that our voters approved a 3.3% increase to the tax levy in May. However, the final assessment in the summer resulted in a net 2.2% increase to the levy. And then the board, on top of that, decided to take some remaining fund balance to further offset the tax levy, which brought it down to 1.96%. So this was a big deal, I think, in terms of the board trying to navigate the balance between budgeting for unanticipated needs, but also being sensitive to the climate within the community. And that should be our starting point as we go into this school year. So I'm going to use this as a basis for our budget development and our community meetings when we come back towards the spring and it becomes time to get out notification and information about how the budget is shaping up for next school year. To date, we have realized state aid reductions in the amount of $190,000. So while you have heard and read that the governor is making full the state aid payments that were in question at the end of last school year, there was one payment last school year that was withheld. So part of this is driven by that. That's where you'll see the BOCEs and excess cost aids still to be determined in the amount of about $59,000. And you may have read recently that our transportation aid for claims between March and June are currently being denied. And that's a significant cost for us, or reimbursement for us of $130,000. So we're still in this tenuous kind of environment in relation to our funding for this school year. Our hope is, with the prospects of a stimulus package, and I know there were some developments today on that, that again, this will be made whole as we get towards the spring or the summer. Sometimes that can be slow to develop, but we'll see what comes with this. But we're still realizing, again, a net reduction to date in aid as we're moving along here. As of today, we anticipate a 1.5% increase to our health insurance premium, the cost to the district. Our TRS projection that we're factoring right now is 10%. It's a slight increase from last school year. And our ERS contribution, we're anticipating an increase to 16.2%. It's just, almost 2% net increase from where we were last school year. And we have not received budget data from BOCEs yet, but we anticipate that we'll receive that over the next month or two. So just some very preliminary data thus far going in. Sometimes you used to see large spikes in TRS, and that could be a real point of concern. However, in how the state provides this, or I should say how the state establishes the rate now, there's more of a smoothing process, so we don't realize large increases to TRS contributions like we did in the past. So that's a good thing for us, but there will be a small increase.
Can I just
Yep.
quick question along, just so I have it in my head right, and I'm sort of looking at Ann.
Yep.
When we talk about the TRS increase going from, or contribution rate going from 14.6 to 16.2, the change in the actual dollar amount is not, I can't do the math, 1.6. It's really more like a 10% increase in that line item. Is that right? Yes. Okay. So I take 16.2 minus 14.6 and then divide by 14.6. Okay, cool. Great. Good. Thank you.
So we talked about establishing some of the philosophical kind of underpinnings of budget development this year. And I've talked with my team here and our teachers that goals are important, and it's important to have clear goals as a district. Certainly we have our board goals and our district goals. But when it comes to execution, as a system, as a school system, you don't really rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems and the systems that you have in place. So when we think of ourselves as an organization that's really trying to drive student learning, we want to make sure that we have good systems in place surrounding that. We've talked about this in the past. I'm going to reference it again in just a moment. And through the budget development process, the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. And the main thing is the experience that our students are having inside of our school. And thinking of the budget development process as actively constructing and contributing towards refining those processes and funding the processes and the systems that contribute to student success over our long term. So you may recall our Strategic Coherence process, and I just want to point to, Judy will be speaking more about our work in each of these strategy areas next meeting. So I don't want to get out in front of her, but I just want to remind the board that we had 5 key strategies that resulted as part of that process. And just going from the bottom up, one centered around curriculum alignment, one centered around the professional learning processes for our staff, goal-setting processes for our students, how we work with more vulnerable populations within our school, and communication process. I'm going to put communication aside for a moment. These other 4 strategies are all geared towards making sure we have good systems in place to support our students in how we are constructing their experience here at Haldane. So when we talk about the main thing, that's the main thing. And the costs related to these systems at times are not significant. But as we go into budget development, we want to make sure we fund these things first. And then we can backfill with all the other things that are important when it comes to running a school system in a school district. So it's just a slight shift in how we've entered into previous budget development processes. Again, we may have used a rollover process in the past, and that serves an important purpose. As our starting point this year, though, I'm pointing us towards our strategies as the starting point for how we enter into the budget development process. And again, Judy will have a little bit more, she'll have a lot more detail as it relates to the work behind each of these strategies at our next meeting as part of our curriculum update. So we anticipate a budget development process with still some a level of uncertainty. But we must keep those strategies in mind. The COVID crisis is, I guess it's a long-term crisis in that we've been in this for a while now. It certainly feels like forever, but the 9 months that we've been in this crisis, but 9 months from now we'll likely be in a post-COVID planning mindset. So I just want us to keep that in mind as we go through budget development. COVID is real. We're still going to have costs related to it. We may have some anticipated needs going into next school year. I do think how we've managed the school year up to this point will help offset needs that may come up, down the road. So the very fact that we're in school and we've been in school a significant amount up to this point is helping us in terms of offsetting any long-term need as it relates to COVID. There will be some, but it won't be at the level of schools who've only been in session for 5 or 6 days. And there's many schools out there that are in that environment. So we have to be mindful of it. But again, keeping our long-term strategies in mind will address both COVID-related issues and then just improving our school district beyond COVID as well. So we've proposed parameters in the past, and I'm going to use these as a starting point. They're the same parameters that we established last school year, and these are here for board feedback. So we're not adopting these parameters tonight. They're just for your consideration. Developing a budget up to the levy limit was a parameter we've utilized for the last 2 years. Incorporating recommendations from the coherence planning process to the extent possible. And this, we're really beyond the process of planning into the strategy work now. And again, Judy will be speaking to that more at our next meeting, and maintaining all existing programs for students. So I offer these not as an exhaustive list, but as a conversation starter that will help the administration when we're developing the budget for the upcoming school year. I'd say the primary one we need to be aware of sooner rather than later is if we're going up to the levy limit. I'll remind the board, no different than you did last year, you can still go up to the levy limit and still hold on to perhaps being mindful of returning dollars to the community later on. So you know that come May on the budget vote, that's not an all or nothing proposition. If you want to, in August, when we set the tax rate, you can utilize excess fund balance to offset that if you feel that there's a level of fiscal stress within the community that you want to do something about. So we applied that strategy last year. I think that's gone well. That may be a strategy we wish to employ in the future. I don't mean to get too far ahead of it, but just a reminder there. So, but I would say we would need to know about whether or not we're budgeting up to a levy limit come January. And last year we had to adapt our strategy. I think I only met with the Arts Alliance last year before we went into closure. So, you know, our goal is to be able to sit down with each of our partners as well as some other community groups. And Jen and I had I felt a very productive experience where we were able to actually pull the leadership from many of our supporting groups as well as our community leadership in a Zoom meeting come springtime. So we may lean on that structure as well. One of the things we've learned through the COVID process, and I think refined, is some of our community outreach strategies to make it more accessible for folks who we would turn to access us and for us to access them. So we'll flesh out some more engagement ideas as we get further into budget development. But for tonight, I want the board just to be aware that we certainly plan to continue to engage our partners as it comes to budget development through the spring. All right, so I'll pause there for questions and answers, and I'll come back to the chair at this point. Thank you for that.
Phil, I had a thought about I don't know if you're ready for feedback on the initial, the parameters from the board, but my initial thought with the third bullet point of maintaining existing programs is I know that that's something we've always said, and I just wonder about the language of it a little bit. I wonder if it's counter to the idea that we're budgeting a little differently this year and we're really thinking about the strategies first. So we certainly don't want to give our students less than what they're getting now, but it might look different. And if it looks different, I don't know if that means we're maintaining all existing programs, right? We might say, this isn't working, this program, but we're going to do this program instead.
Right.
And I personally would want to make sure that you and the team felt like they had the space to make those kinds of choices and to not feel like they had to stay in the lanes
That's helpful.
that currently exist.
No, thank you. Thank you for that.
And I was going to say something similar. That it feels like if in due diligence you actually do incorporate recommendations from the strategic coherence planning process, then it necessitates that 3 may in fact change. I mean, there's a flow to it in one way or another that I think.
Yeah, exactly. Go ahead, Peggy, were you going to say
No,
something?
I think that's right. I wouldn't have thought of, because it's actually the one part of the presentation where I sort of stopped and thought about it, but did not have any coherent thoughts regarding it. But I think that's right. I'm not sure what the right language would be, but instead of maintaining all existing, sort of like ensuring that students have, I don't know, high quality, I don't know, something along those lines. But I think that makes a lot of sense, because we may decide that there's things that we're doing that don't fit with that. That's great. Thanks for pointing that out.
My only question would be on strategic coherence plan, and maybe this is a little bit tip into next week, or maybe it's looking down the road towards as you actually build out the budget. But I guess my interest would be, is there a sequencing question on elements of this plan, and are there upfront things that we need to do that will need to be done more quickly to pay off down the road? And are there budget implications to that? That's kind of the thing that's sitting, like,
Right.
This past, we've sort of had to deal with the reality on the ground.
Right.
But especially as you look forward to, I think a lot of people are thinking, all right, next summer and fall, things are going to be new. But even beyond that, next 3 years from now,
Right.
what do we do now to be where we, and that's just running through my head.
And ideally, and what we're trying to begin to, each year we take a slight little shift in how we facilitate the budget development. And we went through, we invested a significant amount of work into a coherence plan last school year. Right. The strategy work, we're just lifting off the ground. So, and again, Judy will speak to how some of this is shaping up, but ideally, we're going into a school year already having that strategy work defined. Mm-hmm. And as I'm working with our teachers and our other teacher leaders and our administrators, we've already defined by November what our needs are going to be for the following school year. From a funding perspective. Yep. That way, there's no ambiguity. I think there might be, we're just, in the fact that we're lifting this work off, we started in October. Yeah. And, I'm not sure how it's going to line up. I know it's not going to line up perfectly through budget development, but as we get in cycle now, it should line up better in successive years, which will allow us, you pointed to, well, we're going to need this first, in order to do this work down the road. It should allow us to anticipate that, because it's a continual process of stepping back, evaluating where you are, what your potential needs may be, and then making the investment in that, stepping back, evaluating how that went, right, and getting into a cycle with that intention behind it.
Okay, great.
Any other initial comments, questions? Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any communication from the public at this time? Committee minutes, we made some revisions to the policy committee minutes from October 30th, and the November 20th ones are here as well for everyone to review. Information reports are also available, and then we'll go into our consent agenda minutes. May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
These are our minutes from the November 17th meeting. Any questions or comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Consent agenda financial. May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
Any questions or comments? All in favor? Aye. Consent agenda personnel. May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion?
What's a 19A examiner?
It's a great question.
No, it's
It's a question I asked Tim yesterday. Tim, remind me, what's the 19A examiner? When it comes to some certification, specifically as it relates to safety requirements for our drivers, it's an individual who could come in and assess that, which includes actually following our buses as they go on their runs, make sure they're signaling properly in accordance with whatever the law or the regulations are around how soon you're supposed to signal, as an example of that. The 19A examiner does those things. He or she will facilitate that process. We can have somebody in-house do this. However, in the transition, with Eliza retiring, our current dispatcher is not yet certified, but we plan to do that. So this is just bridging the gap between now and then.
Thank you.
Did you have something else you want to say?
Nothing on 19A.
I just wanted to point out that I'm actually going to abstain from voting on this particular panel. I have a relative. My son is actually going to be appointed as a I think primarily a math tutor at the school. So we're very excited about the opportunity it presents to him, and I think the school is probably pretty happy to have Pete too. So, but I won't be voting on that.
Thank you, Peggy.
Just one more comment. You'll note Ms. Prey is anticipated retirement effective the end of this month. We're going to be sorry to see Ms. Prey go. Ms. Prey, I will say, was the first teacher, I think. She wasn't the first teacher I met here, but she was the first teacher I sat next to in one of my first days on campus here. And she was incredibly warm and welcoming of me. I was in a professional learning thing we had set up that summer, and 20 years in the service of service to the Haldane Central School District, and I know Ms. Prey is looking forward to spending more time with her family and her grandchild, and we're sorry to see her go, but we're also very happy for her and what comes next for her.
Great. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, new business, approval of CSE, CPSE placement recommendations. Ms. Platt?
Be it resolved that, upon the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools, the Board of Education hereby approves the recommendations of the Committees on Special Education and Preschool Special Education as presented.
May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Approval of the school budget calendar. Ms. Platt?
Be it resolved that, upon the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools, the Board of Education hereby approves the Haldane School Budget Calendar for the 2021-2022 school year as presented.
May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
May I have a second, please?
A second.
I believe there are no changes to this as it was presented last meeting. Is there any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
And budget season has officially begun. Our capital referendum project, Ms. Platt.
Be it resolved that, upon the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools, the Board of Education hereby awards the Capital Referendum 2019 Painting Services Contract, including all alternates, to Peter Gisandi and Company Incorporated, 11 Harding Avenue, White Plains, New York, 10606, in the amount of $43,250, and authorizes the superintendent to sign the contract on behalf of the district.
May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so just a few moments to talk about the superintendent's mid-year review. Peggy Clements is our fearless leader in the review process. So Peggy, I'm going to turn it over to you just to give a little information to the public, to the board.
Yeah, I guess I don't think we've done this in the past, but I think it's worthwhile for us to point out. I don't think we've made a public statement or had this be part of the agenda in the past. We have definitely done a mid-year evaluation in the past, but I think it's worthwhile just to let the public know that that there is a process for engaging with Dr. Benante to collaborate to look at the work that he's doing for the district, and we're about to kick off the mid-year part of that evaluation, really with a focus on meeting the goals. And so will be a conversation probably after our next board meeting.
Thank you. And we'll be meeting in executive session. Part of our executive session tonight will be to start that process of discussion. Okay, any communication from the public? Does the board have any reflections they would like to share?
I have a reflection.
Yeah.
I was on my normal walk in the morning, which I've taken to doing instead of commuting, which is phenomenal, by the way. I get to walk around through the woods. But I was coming back. Did we de-accession a school bus? Do you know? Did we de-accession a school bus? I was walking through Nelsonville, and it was sort of the saddest thing because there's a tow truck pulling a school bus behind where the words had been painted out. So I'm obviously like, I think that might be ours that we've sold off to some, but it was sort of a wah wah shirt. And I'm like, oh. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. They get to the end of the life, and that's why we have every year we have our bus part of the budget. And so
We put one out to pasture.
yeah, exactly. So it went on to a better life.
But you should feel, I guess it's sad, but you should also feel glad about the very careful planning that Ann
that's
does
exactly right.
to keep our transportation fleet in such
exactly
tip-top
right.
shape with the help of the maintenance staff.
Thank you, Peggy, for bringing that around. Very good. Okay, Dr. Benante, do you have anything you'd like to share?
No further thoughts. Thank you, Jen.
Okay, then, I'd like to make a motion to go into executive session for the discussion of collective negotiations pursuant to Article 14 of the Civil Service Law, and then we would remain in executive session to discuss the superintendent's mid-year evaluation. May I have a second, please?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
We will not be coming back to public session. Thank you, Dougie.